at the Center for Social and Economic Progress here in Delhi. Good to see you all for this webinar here today, April 2nd, on the occasion of the launch of another CSEP paper. This is a working paper by my colleague, Riya Sinha. Riya wrote this paper on express routes, India's railway connectivity with South Asia. It's part of a larger effort at the Center for Social and Economic Progress. We do a lot of international relations, foreign policy, geopolitics, but we like to focus on what generally people call geoeconomics, which is the intersection between regional economic integration, various types of connectivity linkages, infrastructure, transportation, energy in particular, but also issues such as ports connectivity, in a region that remains still one of the least integrated regions in the world, but where things are happening slowly, steadily, sometimes forwards, sometimes backwards. But that's the area of research that we focus on at CSEP, and that's what also guides this paper that Riya brings us today. The work we do is, of course, on how India positions itself in the neighborhood, to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south, in the Indian Ocean region too, how it works with competitors, with partners, how it cooperates increasingly, for example, with Japan, European partners, Australia, on various maritime, continental infrastructure issues, and also the role of institutions. So I think quite timely that we have this paper here today on South Asia, because we have an upcoming summit on BIMSTEC happening in Bangkok in a couple of days, where Prime Minister Modi is attending with other leaders of the Bay of Bengal region. He'll visit afterwards Sri Lanka. On his last visit, Prime Minister Modi had also announced a land bridge, which includes also ideally a railway link between India and Sri Lanka, maybe one day. We also in the context of some difficult India-Bangladesh relations, less difficulties on the India-China relations with some warming up there. So this is really a great context to discuss the role of railways as an engine of regional integration across borders. It's great to have this paper that will lead us hopefully to some really exciting discussion over the next hour and a bit. Just introduce you briefly to the author, Riya, who brings us this paper. Riya is an associate fellow at CSEP in the foreign policy team. She's been a fellow at the part of the Maitri program of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where she spent 6 months in Sydney last year working on ports connectivity in the Indian Ocean region. She was also visiting fellow at the Simpson Center in Washington, D.C. And Riya has done really formidable work on trade, ICP, ports, multimodal transportation infrastructure across the South Asia BIMSTEC region. So Riya brings us this paper, which really identifies many obstacles and problems and delays in how India is connecting or not with its neighbors on railways, but also really puts a step forward in terms of thinking, of identifying and proposing solutions on how this can be accelerated. So in many ways, it's a blue skies paper. It's a paper that may not fly today or tomorrow, Riya, but it certainly has the wings to fly at any point time in future when the skies become bluer politically, strategically for countries to connect. And that's, of course, what we need to do as scholars, is to prepare for the blue skies and when the ducks align for connectivity to happen. It's great to have two discussants with us here today. We're really honored that you made time, both of you, to join us and to help us think through this paper from a policy implication side and also from various different perspectives here in India. Mrs. Jaya Varmasinha, welcome to you. Great to have you. We've heard so much about you and your absolutely fascinating and I have to say inspiring career as part of the Indian Railway Traffic Service, which you joined in 1988. You served across different parts of the Indian government and even abroad. Mrs. Sinha was the chairperson and chief executive of the Railway Board, which is the apex decision-making body of the Indian Railways. She studied at Allahabad University, has held several leadership positions across the Indian railway system, including the Southeastern Railway. And most importantly to us, and I think we'll benefit a lot from that today, she served as India's railway advisor at the Indian High Commission in Dhaka, Bangladesh between 2007 and 2011, when a lot of movement, a lot of new things happened between India and Bangladesh in terms of reconnecting India and Bangladesh through railway linkages. This was also when the Maitri Express ran again in 2008 in April 2008 when it was restarted. So welcome to you, ma'am. Welcome also to Prabir. Prabir, you've been a good friend of our program here at CSEP. You're a fellow connectivity conspirator, if you want. You believe in this agenda. You've done a lot of work on this for many years. Dr. Prabir Dey is professor at the Center for Maritime Economy and Connectivity, CMEC, at the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, here in New Delhi. 3 decades of full-time research, teaching experience in India and abroad. You put us all to shame, Prabir, with your productivity, with your papers on all things South Asia, East South Asia, West South Asia, North South Asia, South Asia. Across the region, you've defined and redefined this research agenda in many ways. Your recent book is on Act East to Act Indo-Pacific, where you connect a little bit India's Act East policy with a larger Indo-Pacific outreach. But if I may highlight, Prabir, may benefit for those who are listening to us, 2 really interesting papers you published recently for IDE, the JETRO think tank in Japan of the Japanese government, on the deep seaport in Matabari, Bangladesh, and the importance of the connectivity agenda between Bangladesh and the Northeast region. So that's something I invite all of you to read. It's fresh out, and I think on the IDE website, from what I saw recently, those 2 policy briefs. So welcome to both of you. With that, let's jump right into the heart of the matter today, which is Ria's paper. Ria, you'll have 10 minutes to present and refresh us, our minds about your paper. It's, of course, online on the CSEP website. You've, I think, shared several smaller pieces, also op-eds, where you're trying to generate a bit of interest in this. I think we were quite surprised, I remember when you started this project, that there have been many studies from multilateral agencies, government agencies, on the importance of railways at home in India and a little bit also across the region. But among the think tank and university community, not much, right? And that's why I think is really the benefit of your paper, is that you really put it all together into a paper which looks at this from a bit of distance, looks at what has been achieved, what not, and we look forward to learning from you. Over to you, Ria.
Thank you, Tino, and good evening, everyone. First of all, also thank you to Dr. Dey and Ms. Sinha. Thank you. Dr. Dey, I've been learning from your work since day one, since I started my career 10 years ago, and it's an honor to have you on this panel. And Ms. Sinha, thank you so much for joining us today. It's all the implementation work that you have led and done over the years that has informed my paper. So really honored to have you both as part of this panel today. What I'll do with the next 10 minutes is share a presentation, share a brief overview of what I have done in the paper. And yeah, and then we can open it up for a panel discussion. So the paper title, Express Routes, India's Railway Connectivity with South Asia, as Tino mentioned, sorry, just a second. Yeah. So it explores this research question of why has India struggled to sustain momentum in developing cross-border railway networks. There are economic drivers, political drivers, geostrategic incentives that are driving a lot of India's efforts towards cross-border connectivity, but it's the railway sector it's a cross-border railway sector that has struggled to sustain momentum. If we see the number of ICPs growing, the inland waterways routes growing at a cross-border level, but that's not the same with the railway connectivity. And that's a key question that I started this paper with. To answer this question, I had a 3-layered objective, which was 1, to analyze what has been the progress over the last 2 decades in India's approach to railway connectivity, to identify what the challenges have been in this modal shift from road to railways for cross-border transportation, and then to suggest policy recommendation geared towards increasing the modal share of railways for both freight and passenger transportation. On the left, you see I was going through some of my fieldwork photos from over the years, and I realized that the first photo was taken in 2015. It's the same location at the Petrapol-Benapol border. That is before that was at a point when railway lines were not operational. You see cars on the railway tracks, you see trucks crossing through the railway tracks in the background, and just at the same location in 2023, when the railway lines have restarted, when there is infrastructure in place, when there are security checks in place to facilitate the movement of cross-border railways. So movement is happening. The question is, why is this movement not increasing over the years? And why I started this study was, I had a lot of questions on, like, why am I specifically focusing on railways? A lot of pessimistic opinions also, in terms of that perhaps there is no future for cross-border railways. But this was an area that did demand further study, because in the South Asian region, there is a low modal share of railways in freight and passenger traffic, only 4 to 5%. We are still a region which has the highest logistics cost when compared to, at the range of 10 to 25% when we compare it to US, Europe, Singapore, or even China. And plus, there's been increasing Government of India investment in expanding rail connectivity with South Asia, Southeast Asia. It's mentioned in a lot of our bilateral documents, a lot of joint statements. So really to understand what is the future path. And then it's not just an Indian demand, but on the other side, there has been a growing demand for railway infrastructure from the neighboring countries as well. Two examples here: Bhutan's Transport Integrated Strategic Vision 2040 emphasizes on the need to connect with Indian railways. Nepal's long-term plan also envisions developing 2,200 kilometers of railway by 2044. Two of these lines are already linked with India. And in addition to this, a geopolitical development that we have seen over the last 15 years in this region is that China is also expanding railway connectivity plan with the neighboring countries. The Kirung-Kathmandu railway line being one that's mostly in the news, but of course many other smaller railway lines in the neighboring countries as well. In terms of sources that I used for this paper, there were field visits, of course, to Atari Railway Yard in Amritsar, close to Amritsar, Petrapol, Biratnagar Railway Yard in Nepal, and also to Colombo Railway Yard. I also relied on archival sources for a lot of diplomatic exchanges, India-Nepal and India-Bangladesh papers published by Avtar Singh Bhasin. I also did a detailed study of secondary information, including Dr. Day's, a lot of Dr. Day's work as well on this subject, Indian Railways Yearbook, World Bank database books, and many research papers that have been written on this. Stakeholder engagements also included ones with policy establishment, but also with the trade side and the logistics players. And the data used is from DGCINS. In the next part of the presentation, I'll focus on what India has done so far in the last 2 decades. Now, there have been plans both at the regional level as well as the bilateral level. The regional railway plans, SAARC had plans for a railway corridor. There were about 5 railway corridors that were identified, but of course, they have been put indefinitely on hold. The BIMSTEC master plan for transport connectivity, slightly different approach than SAARC. It does identify some railway corridors in the region, but it is a part of multimodal transportation plan, and it mostly focuses on linking the seaport with railway lines rather than focusing on the cross-border component of railway lines. At the SASIC level, also 2 railway corridors were identified between Nepal and Kolkata, and India and Bangladesh, different lengths, different kilometers. So at a regional level, there have been efforts to at least put a plan together for a multi-country railway line, railway corridor. But these have not seen a lot of progress. However, at the bilateral level, we see more progress when it comes to railway connectivity, starting with the case of India and Bangladesh, for example. Even though 6 out of 7 historical railway lines actually have been revived with Bangladesh, road still remains a dominant mode of transportation, and railway is just about 2%. This is despite the fact that Bangladesh is India's largest trading partner in South Asia. In 21-22, it became the 4th largest export destination and continues to be in the top 10 export destinations for India. these links between India and Bangladesh. They were operational till up to 1965, to when it was to East Pakistan, and now there have been efforts to revive a lot of these links. In these two tables, I show the first is on the freight movement, the railway lines that are operational, inaugurated, and planned. And the second table is on the passenger railway lines. We have three passenger railway lines with Bangladesh, and one was operationalized during Ms. Sinha's tenure as a railway advisor in Bangladesh, the Maitri Express. So these are the existing railway lines that we have with Bangladesh right now. Yeah, just a brief map. There are also plans of extension of railway lines in the northern part, the Haldibari-Chilahati railway line, to connect with Nepal and Bhutan, but that's still at the planning stage as of now. Between India and Nepal, most of the railway lines so far have been developed through a grant from the government of India. MOUs have been signed on different kinds of railway lines, but the good news is that currently we have 3 complete and 2 operational railway lines between India and Nepal. And the first and also the first passenger railway line ever to work between India and Nepal, that is the Jayanagar-Bijalpura railway line. There are certain challenges in cross-border railway connectivity. You can see it from the map that there are a lot of plans. Out of these, only 2 are operational, while one more is complete. There are, and I'll come to this in detail later, there is talk of improving institutional capacity, limited availability of private funding, and lack of prioritization of railway development, cross-border railway development in general, in Nepal, in India, on this cross-border component. Between India and Bhutan, even though currently there's no active, no operational railway line, there is a plan to connect. There is a plan to have 5 railway lines between both countries, but the one that has seen momentum so far is the Kokrajhar-Galefu railway line, for which the final location survey has been completed. And this railway line is going to connect to the Galefu Mindfulness City, which is a pride project for the government of Bhutan. India and Myanmar also is a very interesting story. This is the last decade has seen for the first time that railway lines are being constructed in the northeast region with plans to connect it to Myanmar. Right now, with the situation in Manipur, obviously a lot of these plans have been put on hold, but it has been a long journey where feasibility studies have been conducted for railway lines in the northeast region, rejected and taken up again in 2019, which has led to some movement and operationalization of railway lines so far. Few other railway lines are planned. Some of them delayed in implementation, which are based in Sikkim and Mizoram as well. India and Pakistan is also a very unique story when it comes to cross-border railway connectivity, because after 1972, India and Pakistan decided to set up Samjhauta Express. The train ran on bi-weekly schedule, and it was sort of successful for some time at least. And then also the Munnabhaw Khokhrabad train was restarted, the Thar Express as it was called, in 2006. Of course, right now all railway services between India and Pakistan are suspended. There were issues with the SOPs in how to mobilize railway movement, but also concerns about illegal goods also coming through these railways. So this is where the India-Pakistan railway line stands, because this was not so much about economics as it was a confidence building measure between India and Pakistan. And sometimes when that is the rationale, it is very difficult to sustain many cross-border linkages or even overcome the challenges that we face in cross-border connectivity. India-Sri Lanka is also a very interesting story that we came across with the Boat Mail Express that was active till 1983. Right now, there is no multimodal railway come ferry service, but there is a land bridge that has been, there are plans for a land bridge. Ferry service has been restarted, but still there are no plans for, a cross-border multimodal connectivity between India and Bangladesh. Why is India, after seeing all of these developments at different stages with different countries, I also asked a question in the paper, like, what are India's drivers for improving this cross-border railway connectivity? Why are we seeing so much momentum in the last 10 years? Because before that, there was, before that, or even much earlier, you could see a policy of regional isolation. There was a lack of incentive and reciprocity to connectivity from the region. Plus, also India's own capacity in the 1970s, in the 1980s to produce rolling stock. All of that situation has changed. Even though in the region currently most of the railway operations are still done through the government sector. Three important drivers to note here are the one is the economic part of it. Bangladesh is India's top 10 export destination. Over the last 10 to 12 years, there has been a doubling of India's trade with South Asia. And India continues to be the largest trading partner for Nepal and Bhutan in the region. This requires multimodal logistics connectivity. This requires for the time and cost of movement of goods to go down in the region. And this is one of the reasons why investment in railway connectivity is important. It is also a policy mandate. It is also on the political side of things. India's neighborhood first and Act East policies. A very important component of that is to improve connectivity between India and the neighboring countries. And finally, geostrategic compulsions. As I said, China is investing in projects in Nepal, in Bangladesh, and also constructing a railway line close to the border in Tibet, close to the border with Bhutan. China has plans for Pan-Asian Railway, which also link Myanmar with Southeast Asia. But China is not the only reason why India would be investing in cross-border railway connectivity. At a geostrategic level, India also has a vision to be a leading infrastructure player in its own neighborhood. And cross-border railway connectivity becomes an important component of it because India has expertise in developing railway connectivity. The last part of my papers identifies several challenges and enablers for development of cross-border railway connectivity. One is to strengthen domestic and cross-border institutional cooperation. A lot of challenges that we see in Nepal, for example, is the lack of domestic capacity itself to take some railway plans forward or to take some railway plans forward, and therefore that really affects the kind of planning that they can do for the next 10 to 12 years or 10 to 20 years. So one of the recommendations that I make in the paper is that New Delhi needs to improve coordination between the MEA, Railway Board, other ministries internally as well as the cross-border level, and invest in capacity building initiatives for the neighboring countries as well for cross-border railways to work. Another recommendation in the paper is that India can leverage its existing development cooperation as it has been doing so far for cross-border connectivity. One of the challenges with other countries like China coming into the region is that railway connectivity is being offered through external loans, while India has financed most of it through its grant system, through development cooperation, through lines of credit. And this is something that India should continue doing, along with transferring expertise, technology sharing, operational best practices, complementing the existing engagement that India has with the neighboring countries. Thirdly, at a ground level, there is a need to improve cargo handling infrastructure. Rail yards at India-Bangladesh border points, for example, they don't have adequate cargo handling infrastructure. There are times when a customs officer has to jump on a wagon to actually go in and see what kind of cargo is there, and that is not the case at India's seaports or even at India's ICPs, for example. So there is a need for improving the cargo handling infrastructure at these rail yards with elevated platforms, with dedicated trains, with modern customs facilities that is going to streamline cargo handling and reduce transit delays. Standardizing cross-border operational movement standards and protocols. This is something that Ms. Jai Verma Sinha was also telling me, before we started the webinar, and how they successfully did it with Bangladesh, and the same thing needs to be replicated with other countries as well, because having standardized SOPs for movement, they really affect the time and cost of movement through this particular, through this particular mode of transport. Simplifying procedures, including shared bag and space, allocating more rigs for cross-border transport. That's actually going to improve efficiency and encourage greater use of railways for trade. Enabling private sector participation. It is a fact that there is limited private sector involvement due to many reasons, financial constraints, or the private sector, it does not want to take risk. So there is a need to standardize private sector participation through PPPs, through operational contracts, but also an increasing investment from the GOI in terms of how to de-risk the private sector investment in the neighboring countries. These kind of interventions will actually enable more private sector participation in cross-border railways. And finally, and I'll end with this, navigating the security challenges in India's borderlands. Security risk, insurgency, cross-border struggling, sabotage, they all threaten railway projects in India's borderlands, particularly in the Northeast. The solution for this includes strengthening railway security, intelligence sharing, surveillance technology, coordinated border management efforts with the border security agencies to mitigate risk and enable some confidence building measures so that such challenges do not affect cross-border railway connectivity in particular, but in general cross-border connectivity in the region. I will stop here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great job, Ria. Thank you for that. Packing 15,000 words into 15 minutes and giving us a really good summary of what kept you busy for a year, talking to so many people, traveling to so many places, and coming up with these 6, 7, 8 very concrete recommendations on the way ahead. I just want to make one comment before I open up to our discussants on how I want to really the next 45 minutes push us to think about the future. We know about the problems. We know, in fact, that this region used to be more connected by railways, as Ria, you mentioned, 70 years ago than it is today. That's the paradox. We're still recovering in terms of the cross-border, inter-regional linkages that used to exist that have stopped to exist, or the multimodal linkages, for example. But I want us to look forward and what needs to be achieved. I was just looking briefly at Europe. And for example, the Eurostar rail link between London and Paris that we all look up as one example of good railway linkage between London and Paris goes up to 350 kilometers an hour. You can connect between Paris and London in 2.5 hours for those 350 kilometers. And that's something that people do some people do on a daily basis to work or occasionally. And I was just thinking, let's go a little bit less faster and let's think at a 200 kilometer an hour speed, which is somewhere between high speed technically and normal. Let's say 200 kilometers an hour. What South Asia could we imagine, right? What South Asia could we think of if we had those railway linkages? Delhi, Lahore, 2.5 hours, 500 kilometers. Ahmedabad, Karachi, for example, 2 big cities. And again, we're talking about a region which has 2 billion people, 3 times the population of Europe. That's how we have to think in this region. 3 times the population of Europe with GDP growth that is going to sustain, maybe at 5, maybe at 7%, but certainly continue for the next few decades. Ahmedabad, Karachi, 800 kilometers should be done in 4 hours. Kolkata, Kathmandu, 4 hours. Kolkata, Dhaka, 1.5 hours. Dhaka, Yangon, connecting to Southeast Asia and to the Southeast Asian railway network. That's 1,700 kilometers, can be done easily as a 9 hours journey, overnight journey. You could fall asleep in Dhaka, wake up in the morning in Yangon, in southern or central Myanmar. Finally, Bangalore, Colombo. A good railway link here, 900 kilometers could connect these cities in a journey of 4.5 hours, competing actually with planes in some ways. So that's, I think, the South Asia. I want both our discussants and you, Ria, to imagine over the next 45 minutes. How do we get there? I know it's an imagination that is far away, but we need to think in terms of what railways can do for growth and development in this region. Ms. Sinha, I'll start with you and Prabir. Very briefly, 2 rapid fire, maybe 1 to 2 minutes each, and we'll go to longer discussions then. But I'd like to know one thing from you that you thought was, particularly valuable in Ria's paper? What struck you as something that is interesting, valuable? Of course, there's a lot of things there, but you think is really worth looking at more closely. Over to you, ma'am.
Unmute.
Yeah, there we go.
So first of all, I would like to compliment Ria for putting up a very, very comprehensive and detailed paper. She has managed to cover everything, really. And all the concerns are listed very well. And she, for a person who is, I guess, not really connected with all these things, and she has just worked as a researcher, she has done a commendable job. And the biggest takeaway from her paper is the fact that she has collated the entire information into one comprehensive research paper. I don't think there is something like that which exists anywhere. At least I have not come across something like this, where all the information required for the neighborhood connectivity is collated at one place, and all the concerns and challenges are also listed, as well as it does talk about the way forward. So I think that is a huge compliment to Ria and her work. And it's really, really commendable, and you've done a great job.
That means a lot coming from you, ma'am. Prabir, over to you. One thing that struck you.
Thank you. First, I like to congratulate Ria. You won't get, kind of review of South Asian railway networks in anywhere. I can't recollect. So whether I have come across any such, there are some bits and pieces with multilateral organizations like the bank or ADB, but Ria did a commendable job in reviewing South Asia cross-border railway links. I congratulate once again. And she has, her 6 chapters. I read it. There were a lot of interests. She talked about a bilateral connectivity. She talked about regional railway connectivity. She talked about several challenges, bottlenecks, whatever possible. The limited resources. Railway system in India and the neighborhood are actually public service. You won't get much information in the public domain. So if it's the trade, you get it. Everybody can access in very fraction of a minute. But on the railway part, I know how difficult it collect the railway such a micro level information. So she must have done a great job and worked with overnight and long hours. And thank you once again to Ria and the CSEP and Tino's guidance. 3 suggestions here, if I go into the second edition of it. One is, the missing links, the last mile railway connectivity. That could be, the next edition, there could be a section. What are the last mile railway connectivity that's missed? One is that purposefully done. Other is it disappeared because of the partition, etc., etc. So something on the last mile railway, missing links, if it can be added here. Second request is that we talk about multimodal, but when it comes to railway, we also need to emphasize there is a certain amount of intermodal aspects. Asian Institute of Transport Development, the Professor K.L. Thapar, his institute, they did a lot of work. If there are can be accessed, AITD is to be a Ministry of Railway think tank. So that is point number 1, intermodal aspect of the railway. And the last one, which I recommend that some best practices Indian Railway offers in the neighborhood. And if this can be highlighted, that in the second edition. So thank you once again for giving us, going through a very resource-rich, very timely document. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabir. 3 good ideas there already, Ria. You got more work, which is what we scholars like. People that are relevant telling us what more needs to be done after we write one paper. So you got 3 papers there already, Ria. So let's get more papers. Ms. Sinha, what did you think was missing a little bit? You'd like to see more of? What does this study invite more of?
Yes, in that context, I think this is a very specific domain which Ria has addressed at this point of time. She needs to expand the scope of the whole thing. So she needs to put the context of South Asia into the trade routes that we are talking of, specifically of the IMEC corridor that we are starting to talk about. It is the India Middle East corridor which we are talking about. This can be a big game changer for the entire region's connectivity. See, the vision that you were talking about, connecting the entire region through high-speed rail network connectivity, where you can be in all the major cities in a span of a few hours. But for that, you need to put it in perspective. And all these, just a people-to-people connect will not work alone. To give it an impetus or to even nudge it politically, what will really play a crucial role is the economics of the whole. So there is a huge trade which is happening between Bangladesh and Europe. And it would be worth studying how this is moving at this point of time. And tomorrow, if we are able to provide a connectivity through the IMEC corridor, how the cost will be offset. Whether the economics of the whole thing will become the driving force for integrating the region further. See, integration will not happen for the sake of integration. There has to be a reason, there has to be a driving force, and nothing better than the economics of the entire connection. So look at the trade which is happening in this region, how it is working at this point of time, and the two corridors, one towards the west and one towards the east, which is proposed. The one towards the east is already there as the Trans-Asian Railway Network, which is talked about in BIMSTEC, etc., etc. It's been discussed for a very, very long time. But for various reasons, nothing much seems to be moving in that direction. But the IMEC corridor seems to be a little more promising and seems maybe it has been worked in a way that it might see better progress. So if you put the entire basket of your research as a subset of this larger set, you would be able to get a bigger picture of the whole thing. And maybe it would help the countries involved take a closer look and rethink their stand in terms of giving connectivity a boost.
Right.
I think
Thank
that could be a very useful thing to do.
Thank you, ma'am. Ria, maybe on this actually, it's a great point Ms. Sinha makes about how to plan railway linkages within a country, within the region, intra-region, which is the subject of your paper, but third level, inter-region, right? How does this also align with trade patterns and supply chains that are emerging to the east and west of India, whether IMEC, also the Indo-Pacific to the east with Malaysia, Thailand, etc. Is this something, have you found this thinking in government and policy-making circles, Ria, or are we still talking about Akora, Agartala, small little linkages within the country and across two countries in South Asia?
That's a very interesting point, and thank you, Ms. Sinha, for bringing this up, really, because this is a conversation that's not so much come up in my conversations with the policy establishment, but I will say that there are some scholars who are thinking on these lines because IMEC is such a big corridor, and because one is of course the technical part of IMEC, the multimodal connectivity part of it, but there are also geopolitics on which part of IMEC is going to be successful. The UAE-India corridor, of course, is working much better than the other parts of IMEC. And if there is potential to have a Bay of Bengal connectivity through this corridor, extending it through India to the Bay of Bengal region, I think that requires a separate study in terms of, as ma'am mentioned, what are the economic implications of it? What are the economic dividends that countries can gain from it? And this will also encourage the neighboring countries to invest more in cross-border connectivity with India, whether it is railways, one way, of course, but multimodal connectivity, different modes, and how at both policy and operational level this can be encouraged. So I think this line of thinking, this corridor-based approach not just on the west, but connecting the west and east is a very important one. And I think that there needs to be more research on that.
I think we are here at CSEP with our colleagues in trade. Of course, Sanjay Katuria and other colleagues who work on trade and corridors. I think it'll be a very interesting study, sort of overlaying the trade dimension of analysis with the railway linkages towards those corridors that you mentioned. We're getting a lot of questions already, Ria. We're not expecting many, but I'm very happy that people are interested in this. So let me just briefly come into the geopolitics of it, Ria, because that's also what we do. Chitresh Srivastava was asking, how do you perceive Nepal's inclination towards China? We spoke east-west, but we haven't spoken about linkages towards the north. And this is an important issue. The Chinese have been pushing a multimodal trans-Himalayan economic corridor, including with railway linkages. And he asked, to what extent is that something that should worry India or not? Is there an opportunity? Is it even feasible to think about a railway linkage northwards with China? Over to you, Ria.
That's a very interesting question, and one that really comes up often, even as I was doing it with my interviews, that how is Indian railway connectivity going to compete with China's planned railway connectivity with Nepal, for example, and the Gurung-Kathmandu route is very important. But with Nepal, we need to understand one thing, and I do see Nepal as one of the success stories when it comes to cross-border railway connectivity. From the 1958 Treaty of Trade and Commerce, where 5 railway heads were identified, to the 1990s high-level task force, where again railway connectivity was emphasized, to today when we actually have a passenger railway line. We have a completed railway line with Biratnagar. We have the Raxaul Birganj railway line. Nepal has access to India's eastern seaports. The Dodhara dry port is also being developed by India. There is also talk of access to India's western ports. So all of these, and plus with all of these developments in Nepal's demand itself to connect via railway to Bangladesh. All of these development together actually see that where there is a lot of potential on connectivity in the south, to India's seaports, which is going to reduce the cost for Nepal compared to connectivity in Nepal's northern borders with China. The difference here also lies in the fact that the Chinese railway connectivity in Nepal is on a loan basis, whereas India's is on a grant basis. So that does make a huge difference, although both are the Raxaul Kathmandu and the Gurung Kathmandu railway line both are figured at approximately $3 billion. But so far, India has not moved away from its stance of doing it through development assistance. And lastly, one win that India has done in the region by completing these railway projects with Nepal, by having some of the first types of railway connectivity with Nepal, it has also opened the door for more conversations on railway connectivity. India does have the technology that came up in my conversations. India does have the tunneling technology that Nepal actually needs for its railway connectivity. So all of these factors, when we compare India and China, my assessment is that they do favor India. I don't think Kathmandu will go for a loan arrangement with China, but all of this then also boils down to what kind of institutional cooperation we'd have, what kind of mechanisms we'll have for cross-border cooperation. So my assessment is I don't see the Chinese railway line as a threat compared to the number of railway lines being developed with India.
Very briefly, Ria, tell us about gauges and the importance of talking about different gauges, right? We spoke, you and I, in 2020 with the Director General of Railways in Nepal and Kathmandu, and he was telling us how important it is that whether you can plug into the Indian gauge or not, right? This is something that all countries around India face or not. Why does this matter?
Gauges matter because, one, it is the type of investment that is brought into the country, but also from the geopolitics and geoeconomic side of it, the kind of access that can be provided through gauges. For example, if there is a standard gauge in Nepal, but a broad gauge in India, that access is going to be very different. It's going to be cost heavy also, with transshipment, with transloading required from one mode to another if they want to access the Indian railway lines. Plus, when you talk about gauges, the multilaterals obviously promote a standard gauge system. India works on a broad gauge system. Gauges also are a mechanism to determine something called in geopolitics the rules of the games, the standards of development. And this is sort of an assessment of of state power as well, in terms of the degree to which a country is, able to manage its exempt traffic. So from the economic standpoint of view, from the geoeconomic standpoint of view, gauges matter. Where how a country chooses to develop the gauges and on what gauges they want to develop the railway line, that really depends on the diplomatic efforts, the technical considerations, the geographical considerations in a country. But gauges come up a lot in conversations because they matter for access, for standards, for managing your flow of traffic, for flow of cargo. So this conversation will come up again. And when you talk, we spoke to we spoke to railways in Nepal, and they were really urging that, because the Trans-Asian Railway Corridor is developed on standard gauge, while India is proposing broad gauge, to how to navigate those complexities. And to navigate those complexities, there is a very strong institutional capacity that is required in Nepal, to navigate all of these complexities.
And that's also a first move advantage, right, Ria? I mean, if you come into a country and develop a certain gauge, you have an advantage of other countries.
Absolutely.
So the sooner, of course, you develop your linkages, I think that's all written all over your paper. For India, there will be a first move advantage, right? That's also a question that come from Rohit Kumar Bisural, who asked about this gauge issue and interoperability. Ms. Sinha, if I may come to you, it's a bit different, the issue, but you served in Dhaka between 2007 and 11 as India's railway advisor. Such an exciting time. You were on the first Maitri Express. In fact, you mentioned that no railway advisor had been there in Dhaka from India for maybe 20 years or so. So that was the first moment of excitement of reconnecting India and Bangladesh and former East Pakistan through railways. But if you could help us also understand why maybe some other countries look at India, sometimes maybe a bit with some concern. Railways are still seen as, elements of nation building, of mobility, of migrants, of capital. At that point, I assume that political will was there in Bangladesh, but there must be also some reluctances and some concerns that we hear often in these countries, in Bhutan, including in Nepal, that are concerned about too much connectivity with India. Is that something you heard? Is that just words on the street? And how do you address those issues?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Actually, if I could just talk of my experience with in Bangladesh at that point of time, it will bring to light how the dynamics of such a connectivity works. At that point of time, there were two Bangladeshes, literally two Bangladeshes, in terms of the desire to connect and the desire to not connect. So the desire to not connect was a minority, whereas the masses, the Aam Janta, wanted connectivity with India. If you look at just the number of visas that are issued in Bangladesh by the High Commission of India for people wanting to come to India, it's huge. It's humongous. For everything, there is a lot of there is a desire for going into India. So for whatever reason, whether it is medical, whether it is educational, whether it is trade, whatever. So the desire of that part of Bangladesh, I think, superseded, and it managed to build that climate for having a seamless connectivity, especially for between people to people. And I think at that point of time, this became the biggest positive diplomatic initiative that was taken between the two countries post-partition and post-creation of Bangladesh, of course, specifically. So when I was on this train from Kolkata to Dhaka, I was on the first train from Kolkata to Dhaka. There wasn't so much excitement on the Indian side. Okay, it was flagged off by everybody, etc., etc. And as we were moving out of Kolkata towards the border, not much was to be seen. But the minute we entered Bangladesh, it was like you were entering a huge festival. All along the route, people were just lining up along the track, and there was welcome of the kind that even can't be imagined. And this was just the public. This was just the Aam public which was there, and there was happiness all across. And not a single, I would say, a stone was pelted. Nothing. And it was a huge positive welcome into the country. And song, dance, music, anything. We came into Dhaka late at night, and the place was full, and there was a festive atmosphere. It also happened to be Poila Boishakh, which is the Bengali New Year. So people were out there in full strength and singing and dancing and everything and welcoming. So that is the kind of cultural connect or the social connect that is there in the region. And that is something that has to go beyond the politics if it has to kind of find root. And I think that is where the connectivity and specifically the railway connectivity plays a very important role. And whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Nepal, whether it is Bhutan, even if China is wanting to make inroads and have connections into Bhutan, into Nepal, the people want connections with India. So politically, you might get connected towards China, but the movement of, as Ria has also pointed out, the desire to connect to the Western ports from Nepal, and even for the people to move into India and into Nepal, that cultural connect is more with South Asia. Within
So by that point, Ms. Sinha, I guess the question from Ramananda Sengupta from Strat News, he's asking how have recent political issues with our neighbors, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, impacted all these plans? Would a train today, such as the one you were on 2008, be welcomed with as many flowers and sweets as it was then?
I would like to point out again that at that point of time in 2008, it wasn't a very politically conducive atmosphere in Bangladesh. It was a similar kind of a situation where there was a transition between Khalida Zia's government into a military controlled period of about roughly 2 years. And that is when this connectivity came into place. So despite the political upheaval and the change which was happening, the uncertainty which was there in the air in terms of the politics of the whole thing. It wasn't a very happy diplomatic ties between the two countries at that point of time when Maitri Express started. So there is hope that even though there is a lot of political turmoil and the strain between the diplomatic ties between these within these countries in the region, the desire of the people to connect is probably going to push more connectivity, push for more connectivity.
Prabir, on that note, maybe to you, you've seen this play out also last 20 years. What do you do when these things don't move forward, when you cannot build linkages because there's political opposition, difficult bilateral relations? One idea, I guess, is building around. India's been building around Bangladesh. It's had as a record expansion of its railways in the Northeast region. It's doubled the pace of expansion. I think this connectivity now in the construction, Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur, Sikkim. Is that an option? What else? What other hopeful notes or ways forward can you point us to?
See, I would say that it is not just the diplomatic ties between the two countries, which is the reason why there is escalation in terms of railway infrastructure being built in the Northeast. It is regardless of the ties with the neighbors. It is to do with what the country itself requires. It's a domestic requirement. And if you see the kind of input which is coming into railway infrastructure, and as Ria has pointed out in one of her challenges, that the capacity of manufacturing rolling stock is inadequate, the route capacity is inadequate, etc., etc. That is a challenge which is there for the Indian Railways, even for domestic movement. So with the kind of capex which is being pushed into developing the infrastructure of the Indian Railways within the country, that is all going to happen because connecting the Northeast to the railway network on the broad gauge network is a huge decision which has been taken. And it has been decided that all 7 capitals would be connected to the broad gauge network of the Indian Railways. It does come across some roadblocks. There have been challenges for whatever reason. But despite that, there is persistence, and it will happen because that is what is required for the country.
Thanks. Thanks, ma'am. Prabir, over to you on this
Yeah.
question. What's your note on
Good.
this?
Quickly, see, when we fragment the border, we shut down our border. Next is to gain inner strength, the way Ria did it, do the study, go back to our old mistakes, to gain strength so that, we can break the barrier, break the border. That's one. So this is the time, when we can't meet through railway line or through road, we gain from our knowledge. So that's basically a theoretical one. But coming back to the real world, actually, if you see in the RIA studies, there are 4 countries the Northeast connect: Bangladesh, Bhutan, Myanmar, and Nepal. There is a small 12-kilometer approx in the RIA's presentation, to Siliguri to Kakarvita. Kakarvita is in Nepal. So Nepal is also the way it's connected with the northeast part of India and the West Bengal, again together. Now, relatively speaking, the Madam Sinha's presentation and your several other commentaries works, that Bangladesh was basically a domino effect. We are culturally connected, we have civilization links, we are connected, Bangladesh is connected to us, etc., etc. So, despite the political differences in the past, as Madam Sinha has rightly said, that there was a huge euphoria on connecting Kolkata with the Dhaka. So this time also we wanted same thing from Agartala to Dhaka to crossing Padma Bridge, taking advantage of the bridge in Bangladesh and coming to Kolkata, etc., etc. Now, Bangladesh part and Nepal part, as the RIA study says, relatively, progressed well. Two things that we could not do it is the Bhutan and Myanmar. For the Bhutan side, there are studies in progress. There are projects in progress, but the one which she highlighted, I think that's very much in advanced stage, the Kokrajhar and Galefu. You remember that Bhutan government is coming up mindfulness city, the smart city in Galefu on 1,000 acres of land, connecting Galefu within 100 years in the horizon. They would like to connect it to the Guwahati, to Meghalaya, and then go to Bangladesh, the ports in Chattogram and the Matar barriers. So the BBI and this was the grand plan. Similarly, on the Myanmar side, we are almost there in the Imphal, and on the Imphal railway line will reach most likely the next year. All the 40, if I'm correct, the 40 tunnels which need to be digged out, this has been done. So now the railway system is getting into the valley, because Ziribam and in Imphal there is a long patch of the hilly terrain. So Indian Railway did a commendable job over the last 20-25 years to getting to the railway system, to the Imphal, and linking it to the nearest railway in the Myanmar side, which is the Calais, which the British system is coming. So to short, what we can do here, basically, the RIA second edition will look at it, and that could be more work. And there was a plan, once upon a time, connecting Delhi with Hanoi. But we could not do it. But Kunming to Singapore railway line is, the high speed, 200 kilometers plus is coming up, and the railway system has already extended to Vientiane from Kunming. And most likely that will go into crossing to Bangkok, to KL, and then to Singapore. That's going to happen. So these are some of the nodes, and we see going to be connected the railway system and looking at the northeast, either in the Bhutan, Bangladesh side, the Himalaya, Trans-Himalayan side, and other one is towards Southeast Asia. Well, 3 things to do it in such very, very different scenario politically today is that we need a very strong political support. The BIMSTEC summit coming up, there is a master plan, and they talked about the railway system as well. There is a master plan for trade facilitation, BIMSTEC as well. So a political support is very important, without which will be, we don't connect our border. This is the point number 1. The bridging is required, political support. Second is that acceptability with the neighboring countries. This is a real fact that the neighbors, they look at India as an opportunity. the same time, they look at an India as a threat. By the way, let me be very frank, they said, oh, now the words coming up in the social media, particularly in the Bangladesh, you must be following. This is a reality. We have to accept it. The Bangladesh aspiration is 1 trillion economy by 2031, and in view of that, the youth in Bangladesh, they look at it in India, differently. What it used to be, and we have to accept the reality. 2007, 8, 2001 to 8 was a period may not quickly match with what is we see today. So participation of neighboring countries in India's plan or China's plan, they look at it, very, very differently. Okay, between the two, Ria said, and very correctly, the India's foreign policy, which I think is benign. This is it's a bottom up, you require and I am there. But China is, I could understood it a little bit, but it's a top down. So this is what, India's leverage. Third one, that if I can't take my Gati Shakti Master Plan 3rd edition to the border, Gati Shakti PM Gati Shakti Master Plan, does talk about logistics, high speed, all sorts of connectivity, air, waterways, etc., etc. India did phenomenally well in the last 10, 12 years in each and every component, in the national connectivity perspective. But when it comes to the international connectivity, regional connectivity in the railway system, Ria's paper, working paper 85 correctly, that indicates the challenges. So here, if India's plan is there's, resistance from the neighborhood, we can engage the multilateral development banks here. It's coming, ADB, World Bank, area, all where those who can do, or some think tanks, CISA, many others who can jointly produce a regional grand plan, as though we did for the SRMTS, SARC multimodal transport study. It was an ADB supported. The chief was a think tank head in CPD in Dhaka, Professor Rehmatullah. I was part of it, in some. That's the 25 years back story. So these three would be my suggestion. The bridging
that last one, if I interrupt, that last one, I will just very briefly tell us about the trade-off of doing these things regionally, multi or minilaterally, or bilaterally. Ria's paper actually suggests that most of the progress on India over the last 10 years has been now bilaterally plugins in railways and capacity building, training railway officers, thinking through connectivities. So, I mean, is it still worth looking or investing in these big master plans where all 6, 5, 6, 7, whichever iteration or 4 countries come together to think of one joint grid?
Well, the current the political scenario in the neighborhood, the regional master plan, as you said, and many, is not doable one, The SARC multimodal project, we could not do much because of differences some of the member states. But when it comes to sub-region, so I would emphasize is let's do it sub-regionally. Where are the common challenges? BBIN in context, or in trilaterally like India, Myanmar, going into Thailand and ASEAN, the trilateral highway extending it to, Southeast Asia. So these are, two things. Bilaterally, yeah, it is depend on the two countries if they're interested. I am not going to talk about it, but I think sub-regionally and taking it trilaterally, plus multilateralizing the trilateral one. That would be a right way to do it at the moment.
Thank you, Prabir. Ria, 2 very brief questions for you, please. One is by Afaq Hussain, who's congratulating for you the paper, as many other people in the chat box. But he's also asking about, can you remind us about the benefits of rail versus road? Something I assume is normal, but I mean, what are the cost benefits of cost comparisons between road movement, trucks, and railways? Could you remind us briefly of that with one data point? The second one is, there's a great figure in your paper, I think, showing India's modal share between rail, road, and waterways of trade. I have to look up my notes, but it's something like 60% road in India, 30% rail, and 10% waterways. And the global average, you tell us, is actually almost the opposite. It's only 25 to 30% road, mostly rail, 50-55%, and significantly waterways, 20-25%. Now, this is critical if you want to decarbonize and achieve your net zero objectives. Again, in your discussions, is this weighing in India's larger transportation plans or not? 2 very brief answers, please.
Thank you for those questions. On Afaq's first question, on the cost of road versus rail. Now, this also comes up in many conversations, and if you look at it at a theoretical level, the per ton kilometer cost of rail transport, and it's been, reported different figures by different multilaterals, but it's always come as low. Railway transportation cost is much lower than roadways. Roadways is always higher. But then that also depends in practice on how much volumes are being generated, on how the business practices are faring through, on what kind of infrastructure is available, on what kind of last mile connectivity is available in those calculations. So if you see in practice, if just the volumes are lower, then business practices, they often drive up costs to offset potential losses when the volumes are lower. But in theoretical, at the theoretical level, of course, railways are cheaper than roadways, but of course, there are multiple factors to consider when we are calculating that cost. On the second question, actually, I don't see a very strong thinking in India. There is an emphasis on having this modal shift towards railways, dedicated freight corridor running, and the different sections coming up is one big example of it at the domestic level. But I don't, at least in my conversations, I've not come across as India prioritizing these, even at a cross-border level, because first of all, the challenge is that we need to develop the volumes first. And globally, if I talk about it through some examples, the EU is talking about modal shift as critical to achieving net zero to carbon neutrality by 2050. But this is not a conversation we're having in this region yet, just because of the volumes.
Right. And I guess it matters because if you want to become an export manufacturing hub for global supply chains and you're dealing with CBAMs and other carbon taxes, you will have the importers will be looking very closely at the carbon load that comes, right, with transportation. Ms. Sinha, you wanted to come in on this?
I just want to supplement that. There is a big conversation going on how to bring about this modal shift. The commitment for the Viksit Bharat, the complete plan, which is talking of the entire government's plan strategy for going towards 2047. The modal shift towards railways is a very big plan in place. And whatever you were saying in terms of the investment which is coming through the budget into the infrastructure augmentation of the railways is the ramification of that plan. It is because these corridors have been identified where across the country the mode has to shift from road to rail and infrastructure has to be made commensurate. So that is why there is a huge conversation going on in this regard. And Ria, maybe you can get in touch with me. I'll point you in the right direction to check with NITI Aayog also. There is a huge work going on this.
Another paper for you, Ria, on the climate imperative in railwayfication of India's transportation system. In fact, another paper, I'll give you another one, which is you've been interested in working on, which is green shipping, which is, I guess, the same logic that is driving the Indian government to think of shipping from a decarbonization perspective. Prabir, I can't resist asking you about Professor Yunus' comments recently in China. In some ways, I don't know if they are super outdated or super ahead of the curve. It's either or. But he's telling us about a Northeast region that needs to be connected with Bangladesh, that Bangladesh is this pivot for the Northeast region. But at the same time, I'm not sure, correct me, I want to know from you, has there been on Bangladesh side over the last 8-9 months any sort of movement in plugging into India's connectivity initiatives? I mean, the railway now I see goes from Kolkata all the way around Bangladesh to Sabroom. You can actually take a railway from Kolkata to Sabroom, and it stops on the Feni River, if I'm not mistaken, right? And there's still nothing happening on the other side. So if we want to connect a new deep sea port with Japanese finance and support in Matabari to the hinterland growth region or Northeast region, is that happening? I mean, even forget China for a second. I'm not asking you to forget it, but is that connectivity looking good? And for that, we need obviously an energy and a railway corridor.
Yes. I mean, I visited Sabrum for several studies and etc. So many times, and Indian Railway, they did just 70 years, 80 years ago, India used to be a country to be known for the world biggest medical hospital in India, world biggest football stadium in India, world biggest railways platform, Kharagpur in India. So then this all disappeared, gradually. Now I found another interesting world largest railway yard in Sabrum. So actually, in Indian railway system,
That's a yard built in Sabrum on the border with Bangladesh.
yes, on the
Why?
border in the
Why is it the largest?
because the plan is to extend this railway line, which is broad gauge, electrified, double track, to cross the Feni River. Feni River is symbolic, it is just, you have seen it. And then connect it with just about a 90-kilometer, a straight line from Sabrum to Chattogram. So Chinese are building in high speed from Dhaka to Chattogram to Cox's Bazar, So you actually, so you reach to Chattogram port, and then it can be again another 70 kilometer to Matarbari. So there is a place called Chakaria, where India is and Bangladesh government is already done, and SEZ, especially it's called Mirsarai, our Exim Bank co-financing several steel plant, etc., etc. Mirsarai is something in between Sabrum to Chattogram, just in naively I'm talking about. So what we wanted actually to give it a railway access, looking at a 100 years horizon, you can't move because of the climate conditions. Why? So modal split is obviously needed. So that is why we are coming to the railway yard at Sabrum. And just after that, there is a Land Ports Authority office, LPAI, ICP, at Sabrum, which is up and running. But there's no passenger movement, no cargo movement, because other side hasn't reciprocated. So in short, that connecting Sabrum to Chattogram, which is anyway silting very fast, faster than Kolkata and Haldia, and then going into deep sea port at Matarbari, means a new access to the entire sub-region, not just, if you wrote the JICA report, I would like to put on record here. JICA did a study for Sabrum, 35% of the proposed study by 2030. 35% is just needed from Bangladesh. Remaining 65% cargo, the terminals of the Sabrum port, at Matarbari, they need to get it from northeast part of India, So otherwise, this ports will sitting idle, and that's lots of wastage of money and things,
Right.
So I think that a symbolic, relation with Northeast and Bangladesh, India, etc. In that spirit.
Right. Thanks, Praveen. Good to hear about one concrete example of India building for another day, which is really strategic infrastructure policy, up to the borders, up to the last mile, like you mentioned, including towards Myanmar, towards Bangladesh, towards Nepal, towards Bhutan, towards Pakistan, maybe towards Sri Lanka for sure, because there we're talking again about a possible multimodal railway link with that island state. So we're coming to an end. We have maybe 3 more minutes. And what I'd like to do, Ria, is I'd like to end on a positive note, because I think that's what I think we all is driving us to transform this region in line with Viksit Bharat 2047, a developed, more prosperous India that is on cooperative terms, more interdependent, and therefore more powerful with its neighbors. Ria, if you could remind us, I think we talked before about those 3 good stories that have happened now with Bangladesh, with Bhutan, with Nepal, that you have mapped in your paper, and some developments have happened recently. If you could remind us of what worked and maybe why. And then Prabir and Messina, to you, maybe your last sort of 1 to 2 minutes, quick closing remarks before we end this. Ria, why don't we start with you?
In terms of what worked, I think one is the proactiveness from the Indian side itself to develop this cross-border connectivity. on railways, but it's also an extension of what we have been doing with other modes of transportation, with roadways, with inland waterways. We do see India taking that first institutional step. There is a lot more institutional cooperation within India. There is, as we've also mapped in one of our other papers, sub-regional cooperation through the consuls, through the consulates at the sub-regional level, at the state level in different areas. So this institutional cooperation, proactiveness from the Indian side is something that has worked really well. And as Dr. Day was pointing out, that is something that needs to continue. Like you said, build infrastructure for another day. That is the vision that India should continue with.
And those three quick stories, Ria, I cannot resist. On railways continuing, India, Bangladesh, and then the
Yeah.
Bhutan study, and the Nepal one.
Whether it is revival of 6 out of 7 railway links with Bangladesh, one after another, streamlining the SOPs so that the railway lines continue even when there is disruption ongoing at the bilateral level. Cargo movement is ongoing. The passenger railway line with Nepal, after multiple studies which said it was impossible, it happened, and plans for extension are also in place. Now there are other softer issues that we need to take care of. And finally, also thinking about railway line with Bhutan, I don't think 30 years ago, 40 years ago, these things were even part of the conversation. But today, they are an important part of conversations on regional connectivity, whether bilateral, sub-regional, trilateral, So these movements, these success stories need to continue, need to come out. And I will definitely take up on the suggestion to really bring out a lot more success stories in my research.
Thank you, Ria. That's, what policymakers constantly fish for when they talk to us. What has worked, why, and can we replicate and scale it up? Prabir, over to you. 1 minute, please.
Yeah, quickly. Two, the last comments. One is that Ria, it is a recommendation from my side. Cited and regional plan, in a way, the best line. Now, this to be supported by a bilateral going details. That's what I think this is, at least with India, Bangladesh, and India, Nepal, and India, Bhutan. So this would be my suggestion. Second is that in this time, there are many gaps at the bilateral level. We are going into the broad gauge, the standard gauge, but Bangladesh is having a dual gauge. So this kind of gauge differentiations are really a big challenge, but this is also an opportunity to put them. So this time, can something be done to understand a statistical database? If you go to the ASEAN stat, you will get all 10 ASEAN countries, all 6 infrastructure statistical good quality data. We do not have, basically. So this is some way forward. If you have them, this time we are unable to do a regional plan or a sub-regional plan because of some reasons. This kind of turbulence will disappear, I'm sure. We will come back again to a smooth landing or smooth takeoff. But this time, the studies that we do, the statistical database, bilateral plan, some thinking about the sub-regional master plan, revalidating existing one would be, quite good assets when you come back to the bigger one. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabir. And the last and most important word, Ms. Sinha, goes to you. You're muted. You are muted.
I agree with Prabir and Ria that this is there is a lot of positive stories which are going on despite the political upheaval which is going on. And having a larger plan in place and then working on the bilateral challenges or the trilateral challenges is where we need to work, continue, and not give up at all, because we do need these connectivity and this region to thrive. See, for the country to prosper, we know that this is the century for India. This is where the growth is going to come, and we are absolutely sure that this is the way forward for the country and for the region, because this is going to be the growth story of India. Is not going to be just India; it will be the entire region that will go with it, and therefore the connectivity is going to be very, very crucial. So as long as we have a larger picture in place, we can keep on working at the bilateral challenges, and despite the challenges that are there will be a ray of hope and there will be a way forward. So even these little incremental movements forward under that larger context will go a long way.
Thank you very much. Great way to end this, Ms. Sinha, on that also positive note, looking forward. Thank you, Prabir, also for your comments and joining as a discussant. Both of you will be certainly bothered by Ria and by the rest of my team for your amazing inputs, ideas. Particularly, Ms. Sinha, you come with the practical experience of serving in government, spending 30 years of your life doing this across the country. So we have a lot to learn from you and hope we can take this research forward. Maybe one out of the 22 ideas that were discussed today, Ria, should lead to another little paper or study, or maybe a working group where we can think these things through, because that's the work we like to do at CSEP, with academia, research, other think tanks, but also across government, because this is really an issue, Ria, that comes up in your paper all the time that spans different ministries, different organizations, different levels, central, state, local, cross-border, and therefore needs a lot of coordination and teamwork from different perspectives. And final word of thanks to you, Ria, for bringing this paper to us. Really well done. I think it puts CSEP in a great light, and this is the work we like doing. And hopefully this was useful to you also today. So thank you all.